Before history began, before words were born, before humanity carved its first letters or built its first cities, there was only silence. A deep, endless silence filled with the whispers of the wind, the crackle of fire, and the quiet breath of a world yet untouched by civilization. In that silence, thousands of years before Egypt, Sumer, Greece, or Rome, humans walked the earth as wanderers. They carried no agriculture, no houses, no permanent settlement, only memories, instincts, and stories that survived through the generations. They hunted, they gathered, they followed the seasons like shadows. They moved across forests, plains, rivers, and frozen lands. Their world was harsh, unpredictable, and ruled by the forces of nature, storms, droughts, wild animals, and the cold breath of long winters. But there was one thing that united all early humans everywhere: the night sky. Every night, the heavens opened above them, an infinite ocean of stars. Unlike modern people, who see only a handful of stars hidden behind streetlights and city haze, early humans saw everything. The Milky Way spilled across the sky like a river of white fire. Comets wandered slowly across the darkness. Meteors streaked like burning arrows. Planets glowed like gods watching from the heavens. These early humans did not have books, but they had the stars. The stars were their calendar, their map, their teacher, their fear, their hope. And from this fear and fascination came the earliest astronomers. Not with telescopes, but with bare eyes sharper than ours, with minds trained to remember patterns across hundreds of years. They watched the sky because their survival depended on it. And somewhere, around 12,000 years ago, a group of these ancient astronomers, living long before any known civilization, saw something strange, something terrifying, something that would change them forever. They saw a cosmic warning. For thousands of years, historians believe that civilization began around 3000 BCE, with the rise of Sumer, the first writing, and the first true cities. But in the 1990s, everything changed. Archaeologists digging in southeastern Turkey unearthed a place that should not exist, a place so old, so advanced, and so mysterious that it rewrote the entire story of humanity. This place is Göbekli Tepe, a site filled with enormous T-shaped stone pillars, perfectly carved animal figures, circular temples arranged with mathematical precision, stones weighing up to 10 tons, dragged without wheels. Carvings of scorpions, vultures, foxes, birds, snakes, alignments that match the stars. The site dates back to 9,600 BCE, making it over 12,000 years old. That is 7,000 years older than the pyramids, 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, older than farming, older than pottery, older than any known settlement. Göbekli Tepe should not exist, not according to the old timeline. Hunter-gatherers were not supposed to build temples. They were not supposed to carve stone. They were not supposed to understand astronomy. Yet someone did. Someone ancient, someone forgotten. A civilization that lived before civilization. And they built Göbekli Tepe not as a city, not as a home, but as a message. A message carved in stone. A message for the future. A message for us. A message about something they saw in the sky. The desert night stretched endlessly above the proto-civilization, a canvas of glittering fire that humans had not yet learned to fear. But to the people of this early world, this forgotten culture carved into the basalt highlands, stars were not just lights. They were messages. They were warnings. They were the memories of the gods. Their priests, the Shidduel Sham, kept silent vigils on stone terraces that faced the sky. Every night, they documented patterns, glowing trails, sudden flares, vanishing lights, and the subtle shifts in the movement of the wandering stars. Their records were not written on paper or clay tablets, but carved into long basalt panels. Primitive, perhaps, but surprisingly precise. To them, the sky was a language, and they were its interpreters. When the first flicker of unusual light appeared on the horizon, an object that moved like a star, yet burned with the orange brightness of a nearby flame, it stirred whispers among the Shidduel Sham. They did not yet know the word asteroid, nor orbit, nor impact trajectory. But they recognized a pattern that their ancestors had warned about. For in their oldest myths, etched on cliff faces far older than the city, there is a story of a time when the sky fell. The Shidu El Sham gathered around their fire pits, the flames painting their faces gold. Their leader, a stoic man named Yedamru, unfurled the ancient stone slab, its surface engraved with symbols of fear. A visitor of fire descends, he read aloud, tracing a finger along the glyph. The earth trembles, the rivers flee, the sky is broken. These were not myths of storms or droughts. These were records, shaken memories, of a catastrophic asteroid impact thousands of years earlier, an event survivors had remythologized into a tale of divine punishment. Now, as a new fire visitor approached, the astronomer priests sensed an echo of that ancient terror. For weeks they observed the object, tracking its path against the background stars. They calculated its nightly shift using simple geometry, sand lines on the ground, shadow sticks at dawn, measuring cords stretched between pillars. Primitive tools, but astonishingly effective. Soon, they realized a terrifying truth. The object was not drifting. It was approaching, and it was accelerating. What the Shidu El Sham saw in the heavens was something that later civilizations would recognize as a near-Earth asteroid, following a decaying orbit that brought it closer with each passing night. Panic rippled through their ranks. Some believed the gods were angry. Others argued that this was a message, an opportunity to prove their devotion. Yedamru believed it was a warning. A second skyfall was coming, and his people had been chosen to witness it. He gathered the priests and delivered a proclamation. "We must prepare the people." "But prepare them for what?" asked Talia, the youngest astronomer, fear choking her voice. "For the return of the fire visitor," he said. "For the rebirth of what once destroyed the world." The city reacted with disbelief. Farmers mocked the priests. Warriors were unconcerned. Elders dismissed the threat as superstition. Yet as weeks passed, the night sky betrayed their skepticism. The asteroid grew brighter, larger, more urgent. By now, it was visible to every villager, an orange ember racing against the dark. The Shidu El Sham warned that within months, the fire visitor would collide with the earth, though they could not say where. The priests carved fresher, sharper warnings into new basalt slabs, updating their predictions every night. They may not have had telescopes, but they had data, and they had fear. Each night, the people climbed the terraces, watching the glowing intruder. Mothers whispered to their children that the gods were lighting lanterns in the sky. Warriors sharpened spears under the illusion they might fight the returning star. Elders prayed to the heavens, pleading for mercy. The Shidu El Sham, however, continued their observation with growing dread. One night, as Yedamru gazed at the fire visitor through a polished obsidian disk, an ancient attempt at magnification, he froze. The light wasn't just brighter. It had split. Two smaller fragments trailed the main asteroid like sparks shedding from a torch. He felt the blood drain from his face. "This is no simple visitor," he whispered. "It is a broken one." In reality, the asteroid had undergone fragmentation, a natural process where internal stresses are previous. Collisions created smaller bodies trailing behind the main mass. Modern astronomers call this a fragment chain. The Shidu El Sham simply called it an omen of multiplied destruction. Their ancient myths mentioned such a phenomenon, a sky visitor shattering before striking the earth, creating multiple impacts across the land. This memory, now resurfacing in the heavens, was something their civilization had quietly feared for generations. The Shidu El Sham convened an emergency council. They debated rituals. They debated evacuation. They debated the nature of fate. But no matter what path they considered, one truth haunted them. They had predicted an asteroid impact, but they had no way to stop it. Meanwhile, the villagers began abandoning the city. Some fled toward the mountains, others into forests, others into hopelessness. The priests urged them to seek higher ground, though they lacked the certainty of where the fire visitor would strike. Weeks turned into days, days into desperate countdown, and one night, on the eve of the predicted impact, the fire visitor flared brighter than ever before. Its tail blazed across the sky like a brushstroke of fire. The city trembled with fear. Children cried. Elders knelt in prayer. Yedamru stood on the highest terrace, robes whipping in the wind. His eyes reflected the burning sky. He sensed that their time was ending, just as another civilization had ended long ago. But he also sensed something else, something his ancestors had not possessed, the knowledge that the sky could be read, the understanding that disaster could be predicted, the realization that understanding the heavens was power. Even if they could not prevent the fire visitor from falling, their work would survive. Their records were carved into stone, preserved for ages. And though their civilization might vanish beneath dust and ruin, their warning, etched in eternal black basalt, would remain. Generations later, future cultures would discover those stones. And they, too, would marvel at how an ancient people had predicted an asteroid impact long before the world understood the science of the sky. But for now, on that night of fire and prophecy, the forgotten civilization stared into the heavens and awaited the coming dawn, a dawn that might never arrive. The final night arrived without ceremony. No storms, no estrange winds, no signs from the earth, only the sky, burning brighter than it ever had in living memory. The fire visitor, now a blazing wound across the heavens, cast an eerie orange glow over the land. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. The desert stones shimmered as though wrapped in flame. People stood on rooftops, on terraces, on their cracked dirt streets, staring upward with wide, terrified eyes. For months, the Shidu el-Sham had warned them that this night would come. For months, the people had denied, doubted, argued. But now, denial was impossible. The sky was clearly, unmistakably falling. Yedamru stood on the highest terrace of the observatory, the ancient stone beneath his feet glowing faintly from the celestial fire. He held the obsidian viewing disc to one eye and exhaled shakily. The asteroid was enormous now, a sphere of molten bronze, a screaming ember of the cosmos, a star ripped from its place and hurled toward the world. Behind it, the two fragments still trailed like lesser demons, swirling with their own faint halos of incandescent dust. Talia, trembling beside him, whispered, "Master, does the record speak of survival?" Yedamru lowered the disc slowly. "No," he answered. "The record speaks of memory." Far below them, villagers had gathered in the central plaza. Some prayed, some sobbed, some embraced their families, resigned to whatever fate the gods had decided. Warriors stood defiantly with their spears planted in the dirt, spears that could never touch a falling star. The Shidu el-Sham had urged the people to flee weeks ago, but the old, the stubborn, and the loyal remained. Many had nowhere else to go. The priests began chanting, long, low tones that echoed between the stone pillars of the observatory. Their voices trembled like reed flutes in a storm. They sang not to stop the asteroid, but to honor the sky, an ancient ritual meant to guide souls into the after-realm of light. But the earth itself interrupted them. A thunderous roar cascaded across the desert, the sound of air being torn apart, of an object moving so fast it outran its own scream. The ground shook violently. Birds scattered in frantic spirals. Livestock broke from their ropes and fled into the night. The fire visitor had entered the atmosphere. Its surface heated to glowing white. Jets of vapor burst from its fissures. A cyclone of plasma wrapped around it, turning night into searing day. The ancient civilization watched as the heavens seemed to ignite. Talia clutched Yedamrua's sleeve. "It's too bright. Do not look directly," he shouted, but it was too late. For miles around, villagers shielded their eyes from the unbearable brilliance. The asteroid streaked through the sky with a tail of white fire stretching tens of kilometers long. Trees cast double shadows. Rivers turned to mirrors of molten silver. And then, it fragmented again. One of the smaller trailing fragments split suddenly into 3 new shards. Each one streaked off in a different direction, sparking like fireworks. The people gasped and cried out. To them, the falling pieces looked like shards of a shattered god. The air shook with sonic booms. A rapid series of explosive cracks rippled across the desert, flattening shrubs and ripping thatched roofs from houses. A few priests fell to the ground, covering their ears. Yedamru felt his heart pounding violently. He knew this fragmentation meant the impact zone might spread far beyond their understanding. Their predictions, etched into slabs, couldn't account for a multiplying sky, but the main body was still intact, and it was falling directly toward the horizon. A streak of white, then gold, then an unimaginable flash. The world exploded with light. Even miles away, the brightness was blinding. It felt like a second sun had been born at ground level. For several seconds, everything was swallowed by a white void. The air turned hot as a furnace. Skin burned instantly. Cloth smoldered. Some villagers collapsed where they stood. Then came the shockwave. A roar louder than any thunderstorm slammed into the city. Stone walls cracked like brittle clay. Roof beams snapped. Dust clouds erupted from every crevice. People were hurled to the ground. Some were blown off their feet entirely. The terrace beneath Yedamru shook so violently he had to grip the stone pillar to keep upright. The sound rolled across the desert like a tidal wave of fury. It tore through forests. It shook mountains. It flattened villages far beyond the horizon. 3 minutes later, the wind arrived, the inverted tornado of superheated air rushing outward from the impact crater. It screamed across the dunes, ripping trees from their roots, turning sand into airborne blades. The city's outer walls collapsed. Homes vanished in a storm of debris. And then came the darkness. The superheated air cooled rapidly, condensing into a towering pillar of smoke and dust. It rose into the sky like a monstrous, churning mushroom cloud. Flames burst across the horizon. Ash rained down like black snow. The Shidu Sham stared in horror. This, whispered an elderly priest, this is the end. No, Yedamru whispered back, voice trembling. It is the beginning of memory. The first civilization to predict an asteroid impact had seen the truth. And now they were watching the aftermath. The fiery birth of a crater that future geological eras would rediscover. Behind them, the smaller fragments struck one after another, distant flashes like dying stars. Each impact shook the ground again, showering more dust into the sky. Birds fell from the air. Animals fled blindly. Fires spread across the plains. Within hours, ash covered the city like a shroud. The sky grew dim. The temperature dropped. The sun turned into a faint, reddish disk behind the drifting haze. Children cried softly, shivering. Mothers held them close. Elders whispered prayers of farewell. But Yedamru was not done. He ordered the last surviving priests to gather the stone slabs, their records of the fire visitor, the calculations, the warnings. Together, wounded and exhausted, they carried the slabs into the underground chamber beneath the observatory. This knowledge must outlive us, he said, even if we do not survive the cold years to come. Talia pressed her hand to the basalt carvings. Tears mixed with dust on her cheeks. Will the world ever understand what we saw? Yes, Yedamru said, because memory is stronger than fire. Above them, ash continued to fall, and the civilization, once vibrant and hopeful, began to vanish beneath the slow-moving blanket of darkness. The morning after the sky fell was not a morning at all. There was no sunrise, only a dim, red glow that filtered through the dense ash, turning the world into a twilight of dust. The once thriving city lay in ruins. Houses were buried beneath collapsed beams. Fields were burned to blackened bone. Livestock wandered aimlessly covered in soot. The air tasted like metal and smoke. Every breath was a quiet battle. The Shidu Sham, bruised and battered, emerged from the underground chamber. Their robes were streaked with ash, but they were alive. And around them, a fraction of the population, perhaps 1 in 10, had survived the night. The crater itself, though miles away, was a monstrous wound upon the earth. A circular wall of pulverized stone rose into the ash-clouded horizon. From its center came a dull, molten glow, the last heartbeat of the fallen fire visitor. For days, the survivors sheltered near the observatory, sharing meager water, building fires from broken beams, whispering prayers into the dust-laden air. Children asked when the sun would return. Elders had no answers. But Yedamru had a purpose that cut deeper than survival. He knew the world would rebuild. He knew nature would heal. But knowledge, true knowledge, could vanish unless someone ensured it endured. During the long ash-choked weeks that followed, the priests worked with trembling hands to engrave new slabs. Slabs that told not only of the prediction, but of the impact itself, the fire, the shockwave, the ash-darkened sky. They recorded everything. The blinding flash, the roaring wind, the shower of fragments, the cold that followed. These were not stories. These were data. The Shidu El Sham became the first chroniclers of an asteroid impact in human history. As months passed, food supplies dwindled. Rivers shrank. Crops failed to sprout in the dim light. The survivors understood they could not remain. The land was dying in what modern science calls impact winter. A temporary climate collapse triggered by airborne dust that blocks the sun. With heavy hearts, the civilization abandoned their city. They loaded the engraved basalt slabs onto wooden sledges and began a slow migration toward greener lands. The journey was brutal. Many did not survive the cold. Some turned back in despair. But the core group pressed on, carrying their legacy with them. Over generations, they separated into smaller tribes. Some settled near rivers, others in forests, others along coasts. Each tribe carried with them a portion of the records. And gradually, inevitably, the memory of the fire visitor shifted. The facts hardened into myths. The astronomy became spirituality. The impact became divine wrath. The sky became a realm of gods and omens. Children grew up hearing stories of the burning god who fell, or the night of white fire. They no longer knew what an asteroid was. They only knew that the sky could destroy. And so the ancient knowledge survived, fractured, diluted, ceremonial, but alive. For thousands of years, these fragments scattered across continents, shaping the earliest mythologies of falling stars, sky gods, ancestral fire, and celestial judgment. Meanwhile, buried beneath desert sands, the original city slept in silence. Until the modern era. Millennia later, archaeologists would stumble upon strange black slabs in a long-lost ruin. The carvings were crude, but unmistakably astronomical, more precise than any known culture from that era should have produced. One slab showed a star falling toward the horizon. Another depicted a shockwave tearing through buildings. Another showed a fractured sky visitor splitting into smaller pieces. And one slab, now preserved in a museum, showed a blazing arc descending toward a crater-like circle. The symbols matched modern scientific reconstructions of a fragmented asteroid impact. Radiocarbon dating placed the destruction layer at the same time as a known impact crater roughly 200 kilometers away, one whose shape, molten glass deposits, and shock quartz were consistent with a medium-sized asteroid. Historians were astonished. How could a primitive culture have predicted such an event? How could they have recorded it with such precision? How did they track movement of celestial objects so accurately with nothing but basic tools? Slowly, a new theory emerged. They were the first astronomers, not by accident but by necessity. Their ancestors had witnessed a previous impact, one older. Still, and preserved the memory. The Shidu El Sham inherited that memory and turned it into science. In doing so, they achieved what no other early civilization had. They predicted an asteroid impact before it happened. Their carvings, once nearly lost to time, are now studied by astronomers, anthropologists, and mythologists around the world. And with modern knowledge, we can finally interpret their message in full. They were not writing to the gods. They were writing to us. Civilizations rise and civilizations fall, but some leave behind more than pottery and tools. Some leave behind warnings. The people of the forgotten city, guided by curiosity and fear, watched the heavens with reverence. They understood that the sky was not just a tapestry of beauty. It was a force of nature capable of reshaping life on Earth. Their legacy is more than stone slabs lost in the desert. Their legacy is the reminder that awareness is survival. Today, we track thousands of near-Earth objects. We map orbital paths. We prepare for potential impacts. We build systems and simulations to detect danger far beyond the horizon. But the first step, the first prediction, the first true astronomical warning came from a forgotten people, standing on a stone terrace, staring at a burning point of light and realizing it was coming for them. They could not stop it, but they understood it. And that understanding echoed across millennia, surviving in myths, in whispers, in rituals, in carvings. They were the first civilization to predict an asteroid impact. And though their city vanished beneath ash and time, their greatest achievement did not. Their story is not about destruction. It is about enlightenment. It is about the moment humanity first looked up, not with awe, but with comprehension. The sky was speaking, and they were the first to listen.